Hello, my name is Sonya, and I am a sociologist who does work on gender and sexuality. So we'll start today by thinking about what gender equality means, and we'll do this by looking at the Global Gender Gap Index. Next, we will think a little bit about feminism and what feminism means, and also look at some recent social movements. And to end off, we will think about what we can do to help bring about social equality. Great. So to start off then, the Global Gender Gap Index. So what the Global Gender Gap Index does is that it measures equality in terms of numbers, right? So equality is taken as there being a 50-50 representation of women and men in different fields. So for example, 50% representation of women and men in politics, in employment, and also when it comes to health and education, women and men have equal access, right? So the closer a country is to having this 50-50 equal representation, the higher it is ranked. And this ranking is kind of visualized using a diamond shape. So I will be talking more about this figure in a little bit, but just to help you visualize it, right? So perfect gender equality, according to the Global Gender Gap Index, would be having a diamond shape, okay? So that would mean the economy, 50-50% of women and men in high positions. In the workplace, politics, 50-50 representation of women and men. Education, equal access to education and higher education, and health, equal access to health, and longevity for women and men. Okay? So, the most recent ranking was in 2018, and 144 countries were ranked. Okay? So the black line here, that represents the global average. Okay? So when it comes to education and health, in most countries around the world, there is gender equality. Women and men do have equal access to health and education in most countries around the world. However, when it comes to economic participation, right now, the percentage of women to men is quite a lot less. So there isn't equal participation of women and men in the economy. And also when it comes to politics as well, once again, the black line is the global average. So there are a lot less women who are involved in politics than men. Okay? So as I mentioned, 144 countries were ranked in the most recent version of this ranking. What country do you think was number one? I'll give you some time to guess. Number one was Iceland. Okay? And the top 5 countries were Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and then Nicaragua. Okay, so you might be interested in thinking about the top ranked country in Asia. And the top ranked Asian country was actually the Philippines. So in the Philippines, there are actually a lot of women who are involved in the economy and who have opportunity to work in various types of professions, and also a lot of women involved in politics. Okay, so let's think about Japan. Out of 144 countries, where do you think Japan ranked in 2018? Okay, I'll tell you the answer. Japan actually ranked 114. Okay, so out of all the developed countries in the world, Japan is actually one of the lowest. And the red line here, this represents Japan, and the blue line represents Iceland. So let's think a little bit about that. If you look at Japan, for example, then education and health, it's the same as most countries, but when it comes to the economy, and especially politics, Japan is really lagging behind in terms of numbers, right? So there are very few women involved in politics in Japan. In fact, only 10% of lawmakers in Japan are women. And unfortunately, this number has actually been decreasing. The number of women involved in politics in Japan has decreased from 2017 to 2018. Okay? So let's think about the differences then. What are the differences between Iceland and Japan? Why is the situation so different in these two countries? One of the reasons why there's so many women involved in politics in Iceland today is because of the women's rights movements in the 1970s, right? So it's really thanks to the activism of a lot of these female activists that there's more female representation in politics today. And because of that, more policies were passed which try to bring about gender equality. For example, in Iceland, there is actually a number of, like I mentioned, female-friendly policies. Policies aim to bring about gender equality, but also there's a quota system that makes it mandatory for companies to have for there to be 40% of female board members in a company. Could you imagine something similar happening in Japan? Prime Minister Abe has stated that he would like there to be 30% of women in managerial positions by 2020, but he's constantly reducing this number. Okay? So bringing about gender equality is not just an issue of policies in that sense or laws. Japan actually does have a number of laws which are supposed to bring about gender equality, such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Law. But the problem with this law is that there is no punishment for companies that that don't follow it, basically, right? But the larger problem, I think, really is that social environments and workplace environments, or just culture in general, still does not take into consideration the needs of women or men and how to bring about change in how people think. Right? So this discussion of more women getting into politics, but still there's so many politicians in Japan who make statements about women having to give birth to more babies or how women should have more children. If you make statements like that, you're clearly not encouraging women to become politics because you're thinking of them primarily in terms of their reproductive functions. Right? So getting more women into politics is not just about numbers, it's not just about changing policies, but it's about changing how people think, really. Feminism, basically, I haven't really gotten into it yet, but feminism really, at its heart, this is what feminism is about. It's about bringing about equal opportunities for all people, and recognizing the gender inequality that still exists in society today. You might have noticed more social movements discussed in the news, for example, the Me Too movement, or widespread demonstrations in the US, for example, or around the world, especially after Donald Trump got elected. And I think the reason for this really is because after those big news stories, people realize that there's still so much to do when it comes to gender. And also we kind of feel sometimes that we live in a gender equal society. The deeper you think about it, the more you realize that really it isn't so. In many cases, women still are treated differently than men. Okay? So just to end off then, I think the main thing really is just to try and talk about these issues more. As I mentioned, in Iceland, the main thing really was social activism. Social activism is based on talking about things and discussing opinions openly with people. I hope that you will continue having discussions about these issues and thinking about them, and through that we can bring about social change. Thank you.